Hello. It's my pleasure to introduce to you today my dear old friend and colleague, Dr. Paul LaCava. Paul is an associate professor of special education at Rhode Island College. And Paul, thank you for joining us to talk about emotions and technology and autism.
Oh, you're welcome. It's great to be here. It's awesome to see you, and always great to talk about some of our favorite topics. And so, thank you for having me.
Great. It's been a shared interest of ours for almost 20 years now. And I think that you were one of the first people that I've known to work to use technology to teach about emotions in a special education setting. And I wondered if you could tell us a bit about your experience doing that.
Oh, certainly. So, prior to using some of the technology that we're going to talk about, so the mind reading program, the transporters program, some other things. Prior to that, I was a special education teacher, and certainly teaching emotions as part of social emotional learning was a huge part of the curriculum. And I had a diverse group of students in the 1990s when I was teaching. Um, Autism, Asperger's syndrome, intellectual disability, Down syndrome, learning disabilities, physical disabilities. It was just across the board. A great group of kids, had so much fun. And this was in the public school system, generally elementary school level. And even though I didn't know a ton about autism in, say, the early 1990s, that was before I took any formal courses on autism, I still had a number of kids with that diagnosis. And some of them had IEP goals, so individualized education program goals, specifically targeting learning emotions. Other kids who maybe didn't have that particular programming, focus, still needed all kinds of social emotional teaching supports and so forth. So very often I would just teach my entire class and focus on emotions. And back then the technology was more just using the computer as a tool to access different photos or situations or short video clips, and using those as part of the direct instruction for
And
it.
where did you used to get these?
So it'd be right, from our old Apple computers, accessing the beginning, the internet of way back, and finding photos online, or video clips of various interactions, anything that could show emotions in different contexts, because it was always about, it's more than just your basic emotions. It's more than just, well, what makes you feel happy, because we know it's so much more complicated than that. So um, and then the trick, of course, using the kids' motivation and their special interests. So if a child loves Star Wars or Pokemon or baseball or whatever it was, trying to teach them emotions using those special interests through stories, through books, through role play, through actual looking at the videos. And in fact, um, once I started my master's program in the late 1990s, I learned about Video Detective, which is just showing various film clips from TV shows, from movies, from cartoons, whatever it might be that the student would be interested in, and using that to teach emotions. So it was that was the beginnings of the technology use.
And so that helped you tailor the curriculum around the child's special interests.
Absolutely. And you know, while I think I had some original understanding of that, as I was learning to become a teacher and so forth, several individuals with autism were instrumental in helping me to understand that perspective and the importance and so forth. So, whether it was going to conferences way back, like the Autism Society of America and Council for Exceptional Children, and hearing first perspective views and so forth. And then most importantly, my students themselves, just talking to them, getting their feedback, talking to their families. So that collaboration was essential.
And that kind of opens a topic that is very popular nowadays when we think about designing technology for people with autism. That's participatory design. And how do you actually use this feedback as part of designing a new intervention program? Is that something that you've had experience with?
Informally, yes. I mean, I think always wanted to know, what did they think? What do they feel? What are their perspectives and thoughts on certain interventions and ways of teaching and so forth? Um, in terms of a formal, you're right. I mean, there's so much focus on that now. And actually, my next research project, so I've been studying evidence-based practices the last few years, doing a couple different studies. So not just looking at teaching emotions and technology, but across the board. And the next phase in this study is going to be totally focused on autistic people themselves. And they are really going to be a big guide in where it goes and what we find. So I'm very excited about that.
Because I remember when we used to design the first intervention programs, what we relied on were experts and maybe some surveys. So, for example, the transporters was based on Thomas the Tank Engine back then because we had a survey and we've learned that kids with autism really prefer Thomas the Tank Engine over any other television series that they used to watch back then. But I think nowadays you can actually enjoy the feedback of people with autism much earlier in the process and have them affect how the product, the end product, is going to look like.
Indeed, yes. That's why I want to, have them on the ground floor of research development and planning and research, helping with the research questions and all the interests and characteristics and abilities to influence the project.
The other thing I thought, I was interested in hearing about from you was your experience with a wide variety, because you've mentioned that you've worked with kids with different disabilities, not necessarily with autism. And I know that whenever I talk about this kind of work with people, with colleagues, they often say, why are you limiting yourself just to working with kids with autism? This is very relevant. Understanding emotions is very relevant to kids with other kinds of disabilities and also to kids in the mainstream curriculum, because they face computers much more than they face each other nowadays.
Absolutely. And in fact, in the United States, we've had this real push on social emotional learning the last decade plus. And many states, including where I live in Rhode Island, it's part of the Rhode Island Department of Education's curriculum for K-12. And so it's been wonderful, because something we've been focusing on for so many years, the recognition that all children need this support. And now with the pandemic, we really know that this type of social emotional learning support, etc., needs to be in place. So absolutely. So shall I talk about how once we met, how my research focus changed and that?
Sure, why not?
Okay, so I entered a doctoral program at the University of Kansas in 2001. And before I decided where I was heading with my research, I had the pleasure of meeting you and Simon Baron Cohen in 2003. And you had already begun your work at that point on mind reading, the mind reading software. And I was absolutely fascinated by it. It sparked something that was, I'd already been working in emotions and a little bit of the technology, but this was really brand new at the time. And so that led to 3 different research projects that I did with mind reading software. An initial pilot study that was just with children with Asperger's syndrome. And in that we found they all made gains in learning voice and face emotion recognition, and some of them even from the context, looking at films of faces and being able to identify the emotion and so forth. Then I did a study that was my dissertation, And that was a single subject study. So we worked with a small number of children looking at not only how did they learn emotions using mind reading, but did it affect their social interaction? So looking at some collateral effects with their peers. And that was not...
That's actually a very important question when you think about teaching about emotions specifically to kids with autism. That's generalization, right? So can they actually transfer what they learned online or using the technology to other kinds of settings in everyday life? And you actually tested that. And what did you find?
Yeah, so spot on, right? So we teach these kids so many skills, in the classroom, and then if we don't support it and teach for generalization and maintenance, it very often struggles and doesn't happen. So this was a big tweak, and after working with you and Simon and being able to add that as part of my dissertation was exciting. We found that there was no direct relationship. Some of the children had some improved, interactions with their peers, like at recess or in other settings. But remember, we weren't actually teaching directly about social interaction. We were just, would there be a collateral effect by teaching emotions, having them improve their ability to read emotions and so forth? So it was encouraging. I mean, we had some anecdotal evidence from families and teachers past our observations that there seemed to be some, payoff. Mm-hmm. And then that led to a third study where, again, a small end design where I worked with 4 students in the school. And in this case, we had them work with an adult tutor while they were using the mind reading software. And then the adult would also help them and provide prompting in real life situations and so forth. Now, the data, not only in all studies, they improved emotion recognition because they're using the software for a limited amount of time. We're talking, somewhere between 4 to 10 weeks, depending on the study. And in that case, again, while there wasn't statistically significant differences from baseline to, the intervention phases of the study, there was some improvement. And again, more anecdotal evidence. So it's certainly something that merits more attention. And I think some of the new technologies that are coming out really do a good job of looking at this, where it's much more contextual and so forth.
So if you're able to take the technology, or the child is able to take the technology with them to the actual life setting, that might help with generalization.
Yeah, so you have all these like wearables and other kinds of virtual realities and other types of softwares and technologies that are more portable, that hopefully can in real life support those skills. And I mean, there's still lots and lots of research that needs to be done to get it to.
No, but I was thinking about even something simpler like tablets or portable phones that we didn't have back then. The kid had to learn in front of a computer, a desktop computer, whereas nowadays they could walk around with their tablet or smartphone and have the cues close to their actual performance.
Yeah, it's brilliant, right? I mean, everyone has a smartphone, so it's, in terms of inclusion and being in the community, it's not going to be seen as different or awkward. It's just part of normal everyday life, and everyone's looking at their phone. So if someone looks at their phone to get some cues and assistance to interact with others, it's not a big deal. Now, after the mind reading series of research, I was really lucky to continue working with you on the transporters, which was, as you said, based on children's interests and the fact that they really like repetition and structure and machines and so forth, and the whole systemizing bit.
The systemizing idea that actually says, kids with autism could do really well, could thrive in a more systematic environment. Therefore, if we want to teach them something that is not systematic like emotions, let's try and systemize it.
Yeah, exactly. So even the taxonomy of mind reading was based in that. And you talked about teaching emotions to everyone. Where something like mind reading, I mean, any actors could use it. Folks in other professions who want to brush up on the particulars and all the nuances of 400 plus emotions. Um, but yeah, transporters did that, and so we did a pilot study with 12 students using the transporters DVD, and they all enjoyed it for the most part and used it and improved on their emotions. And this study was unique because we actually worked with students who had autism and intellectual disabilities, besides the typical folks who were.
And that's actually an important point, because we often make the mistake of limiting ourselves as clinical scientists just to the group, the high functioning or the Asperger's group that doesn't have any intellectual impairment involved. Whereas we know that at least 50% of the kids with autism have also an intellectual impairment as a comorbidity.
Yes, and it was very encouraging to see those students with intellectual disability make progress using the DVD. Now, it may have been slower progress. They may only have learned a couple emotions over the time period, and it was only a month of intervention. So, nevertheless, it was good. And one thing I've learned working with this population is that they may need more repetition, more structure, and more adult support to be able to access it. But it's still absolutely an appropriate intervention for many, if not most. Certainly, individualizing intervention is the number one thing. But
when you think about adult support, which adults are you referring to? Is that only in the educational system?
No, it's across the environments. So it'd be teachers, paraeducators, teacher assistants, tutors, parents, siblings, job coaches, whoever it might be. And it's vital for success.
Yeah, that was also our impression, which is why I think that as things evolved, we tried to make these products much more flexible in a way, um, structured and systemizable, but also flexible, so that they can be used not only by a single user, but also in a group or in a family with different kinds of support figures, in order to try to make it accessible and easy to implement wherever you use it.
Yes, definitely. So the technology is accessible, and I used a couple terms. I actually used the term flexible structure. We need structure, but you've got to teach. You got to teach people with autism about flexibility, and there's so many skills some of these folks need to learn because of their disability. You've got to teach them to be flexible and deal with changes in their environment and so forth. So I think that's a good tactic. So the latest project, technology-wise, I'm involved with, I'm actually not the researcher. I'm merely a consultant helping out a group at the University of Kansas, actually. It's a virtual reality tool teaching not just emotion recognition and emotions, but it's a part of a general social skills and other types of skills that's being taught for folks with autism, learning disabilities too. And it is virtual reality based. Mm-hmm. And I think it has a lot of potential, and they're just in the first stages of testing this now.
Yeah, also demonstrate how important it is when you teach about emotions or emotional understanding, emotional recognition, to tailor it or to associate it with other kinds of related interventions, where be it emotional regulation or social skills training, so that they could kind of serve each other. Different kinds of abilities could complement each other when the child or the adult with autism has to cope in everyday life.
Yes, and it's always been about, many different types of interventions used at the same time. So the direct instruction in emotions, using social stories or video modeling, of course, all types of prompting and reinforcement, but ultimately self-regulation and self-management. Context is absolutely, just so crucial. And I think keeping in mind all these things, the ultimate outcome. Yes, we often teach the basic skill of, okay, identifying happy in yourself and others, and sad, and then complex emotions. But what does it mean, and how it connects to real life, and being successful, and being happy, and being able to adjust, and so forth. I think is really the bottom line. So. Attaching the emotion recognition instruction with self-regulation instruction is really the ultimate.
But then you already pointed the focus from other people's emotions to one's own. So in order to self-regulate, I would need to learn not only how to recognize emotions in other people's faces, but also how to pick emotional cues in my own body or mind.
Yes, and there's several new curriculums that are really focused on that. Knowing that, understanding how you feel, and you're inside, right? Everything from things like hunger and thirst and being tired to actual, emotions, basic and complex emotions. And so many of our children struggle with that. They don't make the connection between how their body feels, the emotion attached to it, and then the action, right? The ultimate action to get a need met, or to express oneself, or whatever it might be. So there's some really good new curriculums out there that target that, and I think that's really where we are right now.
That's great. We could probably go on for hours. I want to thank you at this point for joining us and for sharing all this great experience and past and future directions. And it was a pleasure having you with us. And I hope we get to see each other again, either online or offline.
Yes, thank you very much. I really appreciate this. It was a lot of fun, and hopefully we can talk soon. Thanks a lot, and take care, bud.